Thank you for that lovely introduction. I am excited to be back. I have some new ideas to share. I think this is my 30th visit to Poland. I want the president of Poland to make me an honorary citizen very soon. So I've been coming here for many, many years, partly because my publisher, PWN in Warsaw, publishes, as you know, all of my books, and I write a new book every 2 years. And Psychology in Life is the only book used in every psychology introductory course in Poland. And it's the only place in the world that is true. In America, there are many, many other books in introductory psychology. So, but in Psych 1, anybody who takes Psych 1 takes Zimbardo. So for me, it's a big honor. Also, have been doing research. I'll tell you later about special projects we have in Nikiszowicz, our HERO project, which is now spreading all over Poland, and we hope it will be in every high school soon. When I come, I also always meet with the Minister of Education to tell her what interesting things psychologists are doing in Poland and in America, to keep them informed about the important role that psychology has played in the development of the new Polish nation. Some of you know that during the transfer of totalitarian communism to democracy, a key player was Janusz Olechowski, who was a communist. And in the discussions about the transfer of power, on the other side of the table was his graduate student. And together, they developed a plan how to resolve the conflict between these two different ideologies. And Janusz Olechowski went on to be one of the founders of SWAPS. Initially, the program, when it was started, was School of Applied Social Psychology, because all of the people who started it were really social psychologists. And I think I was one of the first speakers. Elliot Aronson, my dear friend, whose wife, his wife is Hungarian, but so he and I were among the very first foreigners to come and support your program. And then obviously it branched out in a wonderful way to say psychology is part of it, but we want this to be a university which presents many different subjects in addition to psychology. I was also honored. I got, I think 2 years ago, honorary degree from your university. And I've spoken at SWAPS in Warsaw many times, here I think a few times, and in Katowice. So with that introduction, what I'm going to do is present some ideas about the psychology of evil, why I have studied this all of my life, and why now I have given up dining in hell, given up evil, to turn around 180 degrees, and my whole life is focused on a whole new vision of how do we create ordinary heroes among youth in Poland and around the world, and to tell you about our exciting project, the Heroic Imagination Project. So with that, I'll go over there and start the machine. Okay. So I'm calling this Dr. Z's 10-step program for becoming an everyday hero. So before we get to the steps, I want to introduce the whole concept of what is evil, why I was interested in evil when I was a little child, and why I went from being curious about it to beginning to study it psychologically and experimentally. So the question, what makes good people go wrong, is a question that has been asked for centuries. Theologians have asked this, religious people have asked it, poets, dramatists. It's really a central issue in human thought. Curiously, psychologists like us never ask the question, because we don't tend to ask meta questions. We tend not to ask really big questions, because we try to frame our questions in what we call a hypothesis, very specific relationships between causes and events, because then we know how to deal with it. We know how we have experimental methods, correlational methods. But when I was a little kid, I was asking that question, what makes my friends do evil things? And so we begin, our focus is how do we change evil? And I always like to warm up my class. So here's Santana, Change Your Evil Ways. So the question is, why do ordinary people turn evil? Here is a recipe. We now know from years of research how you can get ordinary people to cross the line between good and bad. Anything that leads to having people think of other people as less than human, we call it dehumanization. Once you do that, that's the most extreme bias, the most extreme prejudice. Once you think of them as less than human, then you treat them as you would dangerous animals. Most of us, when we are alone, feel responsible for the actions we take. The problem is very often when we're in a group, the responsibility gets diffused, gets shredded. And then each one of us says, I am not responsible, they are. And when you do that, then good people can do bad things. We know from the research by Stanley Milgram, which I'll talk about shortly, that we are all trained as children to be blindly obedient to our parents, to our teachers, to our religious leaders, to our political leaders. And the problem is, sometimes those people deserve our respect, and sometimes they don't. There are parents, there are teachers, there are religious leaders, there are politicians who don't deserve our respect, who deserve our defiance. And nowhere in all of our education, in anywhere in the world, do we teach children how to make that critical distinction, how to analyze the social situation to say, what makes an authority worthy of my respect, and what makes an authority worthy of my righteous defiance. I'm going to talk a minute about evil is all about power and domination. That is, people want power. I mean, we get power as children once we use language. So learning language is a great power. Knowledge is a great power. Education is a great power. The problem is when you want power over other people, that you want the power to control people, then it's very easy to cross the line to make that power in excess. My colleague Albert Bandura has a concept of moral disengagement. And what that means is most of us, most of the time, are very moral people. Morality simply means we have a sense of good and bad. This is right and this is wrong. We get it from many different experiences. But he says in some situations, it's like you're driving your car and you put it from drive into neutral. When you put it in neutral, you coast. And when you disengage your morality, for a short time, you can do terrible things and not feel any guilt or any conscience, because then you put it back in drive and you continue on. So he says many of us do little things. We cheat, we lie, we tell racist, sexist jokes, and it's a diversion, a temporary diversion, and then we go back to being who we are. And the last thing is anything that makes us anonymous. I call it de-individuation. Anything that takes away your individuality enables you to do things you normally would not. We know this in most countries in the world on Carnival, when for one night, one day, the church allows Christians to suspend their morality, to wear masks, to disguise yourself. We see this in America, in Mardi Gras. We see it in Rio, of course. And then, of course, the next day starts 40 days of Lent and sacrifice. But I have done research to show that when you make people anonymous, put them in a mask, put them in costumes, put them in hoods, and you put them in a group so that they now know, nobody knows who I am, and you give them permission to do evil, namely to hurt somebody else, they are much more likely to do that than when those same people are identifiable. So these are part of the recipe, the stew that we stir up, and what comes out is a good person can do really bad things. So when I said I was interested as a little kid in evil, it's because this is where I grew up. This is New York City in a ghetto called the South Bronx. Let me see if I get it. And it looks like a third world country. And it was but if you grow up in that, you don't know, because you don't know any comparison. Equally horrible, this is our playground. This is where we used to play. And in fact, interestingly, we had to climb that big fence to get into the playground on the weekends, and many times children would fall. And what is missing? Whenever you see a picture, you say, what is in the picture? So in the picture is rubble, garbage, in the back, houses burned down, huge apartment houses burned, everything burned down. What's missing is nature. No green, no flowers, no plants, no trees. So when you grow up in a ghetto, you grow up in the absence of nature. And that has a corrupting influence on the way you think and feel, because all of us need to, our human psyche needs to be embedded in the natural environment. It also prepares you for prison, because prison is all about concrete and steel and no nature. Now, the other thing is, when you grow up in the ghetto, there are men, it's always men, this is really evil men, whose job it is to corrupt little children. They give you money to do bad things, to steal, to take drugs, to transport drugs from one drug dealer to another one, and for girls to sell their body. And they give you, and even then, this was many years ago, you would get $5 or $10, which is like an enormous amount of money. And I had friends who succumbed to the temptation and did it. And some of them got caught by the police or narcotics agent, and even as teenagers, they went to jail and their whole life was ruined. I and other friends resisted the temptation, although I could have used $10 or $5. And I always wondered as a kid, what's the difference between me and the good friends and my other friends who I knew were good kids who succumbed to the temptation? And the answer I came up with at that time was, I think it had to do with having a mother who was loving but had a strong moral compass, who said, this is wrong, this is good, don't play with these boys, don't do this. Because again, in most ghettos of any kind, you rarely have a father who's home. And now I have a different answer why good kids do bad things. The problem now is that poverty in the United States, the richest country in the world, is at 20%, meaning 20% of all children in America grow up below the poverty level, 1 of 5 children. And this is now true in many countries around the world. So this is the biggest disgrace. That means you're born into poverty, and once you're born into poverty, here are all these terrible things around you. There's also new research that shows that when you're born into poverty, you die 2 years earlier than children who are born in positive circumstance, because you develop autoimmune disease, you live in a more physically toxic environment, and you live in an environment that's simply much more dangerous. People use guns, people are much more violent, especially in America. So there are I'm going to talk about 3 kinds of evil. Systemic evil is the evil of power. It's evil of systems. It's where there's money, there's control, there's political control, historical control. So genocide, of course, as we know from the Second World War, from the Nazis, is the worst. Poverty, of course, is terrible. The UN now indicates to us that slave labor and sex trafficking are now proliferating in almost every country around the world. So they estimate there are millions of people, sometimes whole families, that work long hours, for minimal survival wages, in horrific jobs, in toxic environments, and literally as slaves. Equally horrible is there are between 600,000 and 1 million women and children are sex slaves, meaning they are sold sometimes by poor parents, or they are stolen, and they live in brothels, and they are forced into prostitution. It's now the most profitable business of all, because it only costs $2,000 a year to keep any one of them alive. Minimal adequate diet, minimal rent facilities, minimal clothing. And each one, they estimate, makes $30,000 in profit from the men who prostitute them. So if you have 600,000 times $30,000 profit, that's $180 billion profit. So many of the men who used to be drug traffickers, which is prosecuted by the law, have switched to becoming sex traffickers, which is really not prosecuted in most countries. So these are what I call evil of action. These are actions which are wrong, are corrupt, are evil. There's a different kind of evil, the evil of inaction, of not doing the right thing. And I put up here, climate change disaster. The world is now facing what I think is sadly a time when nations who have not done anything to stop the fuel emissions are in the process of ruining the environment for the future. Most politicians are influenced by big business people who say we can't afford to do the limits on fuel emissions, on carbon dioxide from our factories, because it would cost us so much money to do that we'd have to raise the cost of our product. We have to fire people. We couldn't employ as many, and so big business, only because of profit, convinces our governments in every nation to do nothing. There was a big meeting in Paris recently, and every nation signed a treaty, and very few nations are doing anything. I recently was in Tahiti, among the most beautiful places in the world, the most beautiful blue waters. And as I'm traveling in a boat, the guide says, this beautiful island with palm trees, and this, in 5 years will disappear. The water is rising 2 or 3 inches every year. In 5 years, the entire island will be covered. All the homes will be destroyed, all the farms will be destroyed, and those people will have to leave. And those people will become migrants in their own country. And the French government is doing nothing about it. No, it's not will it happen. They said the only issue, whether it's 5 years or 4 years or 6 years. So climate change, we've been thinking, well, it's going to happen in 2030, 2050. No, in some places, it's already happening now. In America last year, there were 50 different cities throughout all of America that had the most extreme climate in 100 years. Some cities had the hottest climate ever. Some cities, it was the coldest. Some cities had the most rain, some cities had no rain. Some cities had some places that always get snow had no snow at all, big ski place. Some places that never had snow, like Boston, had 9 feet of snow. And so the climate change is not predictable. In some places, it's going to make things better. It used to be cold, now you're going to get more sun. In some places, it's going to make things really terrible. So I say this only because when we focus on things that are wrong, we focus on the evil of action, people doing bad things. But in some cases, not doing the right thing and doing no thing is an evil. And later I'm going to talk about the bystander effect that you know about. When somebody is in need and people do nothing, that is an evil, and how we correct it. So evil is the exercise of power to intentionally harm others psychologically. You do it through gossip. You do it through rumors. You do it through horrible jokes. To hurt people physically through torture, through punishment. To destroy, you kill people. And of course, genocide by nations commit crimes against humanity. Now, we focus very often on the evil of people, but it's increasingly clear that the bigger evil is by corporations. We know in 2008, economic disaster around the world was started in America by big corporations who were focused only on making profit. They would give loans to people to buy houses who had no job, who had no credit, who could never pay back the loan. And so what happened in 3 or 4 years, they would foreclose the loan, take the house back. But what they did is, when they gave them the loans, they also gave good people with credit the loans. And they packaged the good loan and bad loans, and banks in America sold it to banks in Ireland, in Iceland, and other places. And so 3 or 4 years, when the people couldn't pay the loans and defaulted, that those banks who put up a lot of money, those banks failed, as you know, in Ireland, Iceland. None of the people involved went to jail. Many of the people involved made billions of dollars. And in many cases, there were people who notified the government that these terrible things were happening, that corporations were doing, corporations meaning big banks, even federal regulation commissions. And I'm saying, so here's evil at this highest level. Now, again, I point out 3 kinds of evil. And I think in my Lucifer Effect, I was the first one to make this distinction. We think of people who do bad things. And when they do, we call, and the phrase in America is, or English is, bad apples. And here's like a rotten apple. But the question is, they were not always rotten. They were good apples. And I say somebody put them in a bad barrel. Just like when you take a cucumber and you put it in a vinegar barrel, it comes out a pickle, okay? And the cucumber says, it doesn't matter, it says, I want to be sweet, I want to be innocent. Once you put it in vinegar, it's finished. So this is the situational part. Now, the question is, who makes the bad barrel? So this is the systemic. This is the bad barrel makers. So this is organizational influence, political, economic, cultural, and legal. Psychology, us, have primarily focused on the individual because we have a cognitive psychology, a neuropsychology, personality psychology, psychology of development of the individual. And it's only been social psychologists like me and people who started SWAPs who said, yes, but it is important what individuals bring into the situation, their personality, their character, their morality, their religion. That's important, but that's only the beginning. We have to know, what does the situation bring out of those people? Okay? And so we have to always do a person situational analysis, and this is what our famous leader, Kurt Lewin, proposed years ago. What I'm adding that very few psychologists study is we have to understand what is the system that creates those situations, that can modify it, that can change it, that can make those situations better or worse. So we need a 3-part analysis, and that's been my mission to promote. I'm going to start with an amazing example of systemic evil. And yesterday I started a 6-week lecture tour. In Wrocław, I go to Krakow, then I go to London, I go to Nijmegen, Amsterdam, Nijmegen, Paris, and then I go to China and Shanghai. And I'm going to present this, maybe I'll get put in jail, but this is the saddest thing ever. Every year, the Chinese government now, which is again the most powerful nation in the world, next with America, kills 1 million Chinese men. And they know it. They do it because they encourage men, but not women, to smoke. They make smoking a masculine thing. 54% of all Chinese men smoke heavily. 54% of all Chinese men is 320 million men who are heavy smokers. And we know from the smoking statistics and cancer, of the 320 million, at least 1 million will die. Why do they do it? They own the tobacco monopoly. They make 605 billion yen a year. It's a huge amount of money, more than almost any other industry. And they also control the media. That's what it means to have a totalitarian government. And because they control the media, they eliminate anti-smoking campaigns. Now, so it's terrible. But they do good things with their money. They build schools all over. So here's a school called, it's named Sichuan Tobacco Primary School. And on the school, if any of you could read Chinese in the corner, it says on that plaque, children walking in, ingenuity is the fruit of diligence, but tobacco will help you succeed. So this is brainwashing. Every child who goes into that school for every year, it says tobacco smoking is good. It's good for you. Now, it's really sad, except it's going to get even worse. The newest data from last year from Lancet Science Journal said that now Chinese men smoke more than 1/3 of the world's cigarettes, and because it's promoted as masculine, only less than 2% of Chinese women smoke. That's the highest level of men smoking and the lowest level of women smoking in the world. In most nations, at least 10 to 20% of women smoke. That means that 20% of all Chinese men, of all Chinese, will die in this decade. By 2030, the Lancet estimates that 2 million will die every year, and by 2050, every single year, 3 million men will die of smoking-related diseases. So it's curious. I mean, I'm going to present this to say, you know, but here's a problem. I mean, again, when we talk about evil, the government is saying we're making all this money because we own the cigarette monopoly. We're not going to have private cigarette companies. We do good things. We take the money. We build roads and so forth. But you know that smoking kills. And so again, how would you as a leader deal with this conflict? The other thing that influenced me as a child was reading the fiction story by Robert Louis Stevenson, the British author. And it's called Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And it's a simple story about a good Dr. Jekyll who was also an inventor and wanted to invent things which made people smarter and stronger. He invented a chemical, when he took, had the opposite effect. Made him into a monster, killer, rapist, uncontrollable urges. And he did terrible things. And in that other identity, he was Mr. Hyde. When the drug wore off, he went across the line to be good and evil and became the good Dr. Jekyll. But every time he took it, he went from good to bad. So for me as a child, I said, wait a minute, I know it's not true, but I was led to believe by my parents, by my school teachers, by my Sunday school Catholic teachers, that there was a line that separated good people like us and bad people like them. And that line was fixed, impermeable. If you're here, you couldn't go there. If you're there, you couldn't go. But the story said, maybe the line is permeable. Maybe good people could be seduced across the line, and maybe bad people could be rehabilitated. So again, as a child, it opened my mind to say, maybe human nature is more complex, more fluid. Good people could do bad things, bad people could do good things. So we go from systemic evil to situational evil. A little Jewish kid in the Bronx, friend of mine, as a kid asked 2 questions. Would you electrocute a stranger if someone asked you to, like Hitler or Eichmann? And could the Holocaust happen again? The person who asked that was little Stanley Milgram. He asked that in 1962, a long time ago. He was the first person to quantify evil. Evil is this vague thing. So for him, evil was the percent of people in any group, in any culture, in any nation, who would be willing to give maximum electric shock to an innocent person on the orders of an authority. So that's the quantification of it. What percent of people in Poland, in America, in France would deliver almost lethal shock to a stranger? His research was considered the most unethical research of all times. And it got a lot of controversy, of course, until I did my study some years later. But I want you to listen to the very moral reason he gives for why he did this. Now again, we'll do this and I'll tell you about my relationship to him.
When I learn of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, how is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people, who are courteous and decent in everyday life, can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? Now, there are some studies in my discipline, social psychology, that seem to provide a clue to this question. The problem I wanted to study was a little different. It went a little bit further. It was the issue of authority. Under what conditions would a person obey authority who commanded actions that went against conscience?
So as you know, two men come, there's an advertisement in the city newspaper, wanted men for study of memory. And you come, and he's going to give you $4 for 1 hour. And one of you is the teacher, one of you is the learner. And the teacher is going to teach the learner something. And when the learner gets it right, the teacher will reward him by saying, you did good. When the learner gets it wrong, the teacher will punish you by giving you electric shock. The learner, and when the study began, it was no college students, no high school students, men ages 20 to 50. And so the learner, like this man here, gets strapped into an electric chair. Now, he is working with Milgram. He's a Confederate. So he pretends to be shocked. He's in another room, so the teacher doesn't know he's not being shocked. And here's the authority in the white lab coat, and here's the teacher. Now, in front of him, and I guess you have one here, is a Milgram shock box. And this is the ingenuity. The box has 30 switches. Begins with 15 volts, and then increases by 15-volt increment, 15, 30, 45, et cetera, et cetera. In addition to, when you press a button, there's a buzz. Above the level of the volts, 15, 30, is a label: mild shock, moderate shock, high shock, strong shock, extreme shock, very strong shock, triple X. And so as you go along, the teacher is shocking. The experiment says you must go on. And now when it gets to more than 100 volts, the person in the other room begins to scream and yell and say, I have a heart condition, I quit. What happens is every person says, I refuse to go on. Everybody verbally dissents. The experiment says, I'm sorry, you have a contract, you must go on. They should quit. In fact, very few quit. They do what the authority says. They keep shocking and shocking. And now when they get to 300 volts, the guy in the other room screams, there's a thud, silence. Everybody turns to the experiment and says, sir, he's not responding. The experiment says, I don't care. So now the experimenter who started out wanting to help people improve their memory, he's now a Nazi saying, I don't care. You continue to shock him. How could you be helping improve his memory if he's unconscious or dead? So at this point, everybody should quit. The interesting thing, if you get to 350 volts, no one quits. If you go that far, everybody goes to 450 volts. And so that was the horrific thing that Milgram discovered. So Milgram found out that 2 out of every 3 American citizens, men first, gave total shock, 450 volts, to an innocent stranger. Now, Milgram also tested 1,000 people. He did 16 different experiments, meaning in each experiment, he varied one independent variable. So in study 13, the independent variables had women. And you know what? 60% of the women gave full shock, no different than men. For me, the most interesting and important messages of the Milgram study that nobody talks about is comparing study 16 with study 5. In study 16, if you look, what happens is you come into the experimenter says, I'm sorry, we're running late. Please sit down and watch the other person. And what you see is some person like you go all the way to 450 volts. And they say, okay, goodbye. Now it's your turn. When you see somebody model evil, what happens is 91% of people go all the way. In study 5, it's the opposite. You come in, experiment says we're running late. You see somebody like you say, I quit. You see people rebel and walk out. Under those circumstances, 90% of the subjects refuse. So now it says human nature is manipulable. It's not people are good or bad. When you put them in a situation where authority is controlling your behavior, then the majority, not all, the majority give in. When you have a positive role model, like in experiment 5, and we're going to call that a hero later, you have what we call a ripple effect. That is, you then are empowered to resist authority. When you see people like you go all the way, then your resistance to unjust authority is reduced, and you're able to do the evil thing. I should mention that little Stanley Milgram and I were in the same high school class, 1949 in the Bronx. As you can see, this is me up here. I was the biggest kid, and he was actually the littlest kid. But again, it's 1949. It's not that far removed from the Second World War. And he actually, as a child in class, was concerned about these issues. Could the Holocaust happen? Could he end up, his family in a concentration camp? And interestingly, people said, Stanley, we're not that kind of people. That's the Nazis. We're Americans. We wouldn't do that. And his answer, I still remember, how do you know what you would do until you're in the situation? Everybody thinks they would always do the good, right thing until you're in the situation. And so that's what his study did, to look at the power of individual authority. And I took that idea and moved it to looking at institutional authority. Now, in thinking about the application of his ideas, I went back and said, how did the Nazis really prepare the German people to accept the elimination of Jews? And I think they did it in a sense with Milgram shockbox as a metaphor, meaning, what do you do first? All Jews have to wear a yellow Star of David so we can identify them. And that's 15 volts. So all evil begins with 15 volts. I think that's the most important thing I'm going to share today, that's my view. Because once you press the first button, you're on the slippery slope of evil. Once you press 15, 30 is easy. Once you press 30. So that once you cheat a little bit, very little bit, once you tell a little lie, once you do a little bad thing, it just becomes so much easier to do a little worse, a little worse, a little worse. And then you're on what we call the slippery slope of evil. So what I've just done is I prepared a Milgram shockbox for Jews. Oh, I want to go back. Oh, come on. Oh, shoot. Oh. Okay. Here we go. "15 volts, wear the yellow badge." Next, restricted work, restricted housing, no schooling for Jews. Propaganda, Jews are vermin, forced into ghettos. deported to concentration camp, and the final solution. So again, it's a gradual progression. Yesterday, I gave a talk at the cinema with the same model on totalitarian evil. How is it that a government goes from being a democracy to a totalitarian, promoting totalitarian evil? And it's a similar progression from first getting control of the media, getting control of education, getting control of the judiciary, making political appointees instead of elected appointees, taking money from the budget that used to go to education and maybe putting it into military or into religious people who will support you, and reducing voting privileges. And so in this process, because it's gradual, the general public often doesn't know. It's a little pain. And this is what happened. We have a program in Hungary. This is what's been happening in Hungary. And some people tell me this is what is in the process of happening in Poland. So here's another example of situational evil. I'll go through very quickly now. The Stanford Prison Experiment we did in 1971. I wanted college students, not ordinary people. I wanted bright, intelligent college students. We put an ad in the paper. 75 people answered the ad. We gave them personality tests because we wanted people who were normal and psychologically healthy and physically healthy. And we took 24 people who were men, intelligent, healthy men, and we randomly assigned. Half are going to be guards, half are going to be prisoners. And we told them, they knew that this is an experimental prison. And we said, do you want to be a prisoner or guard? And everyone said, I want to be a prisoner. I don't want to be a guard. I didn't go to college to become a prison guard. So nobody wanted to be a prison guard. Also, it's 1971. In 1971, in America and other places, students were strongly anti-war activists in America against the Vietnam War. So, and they were hippies, they were liberals. So, and they didn't want to wear a military uniform, as you'll see in a moment. So the prisoners were dehumanized, de-individuated, they became numbers. The guards had these military uniforms, and the first day, nothing happened because it was very awkward. They didn't want to do this. And they gave them menial tasks. But then on the second day, the prisoners rebelled. And the guards crushed the rebellion, and then the guards said, these are dangerous prisoners. That changed everything. Not these are students playing the role, these are dangerous prisoners, and therefore what? We have to show them that we have the power to dominate. And they started doing degrading things, stripping the prisoners naked, and beginning literally in sexually degrading the prisoners.
In 1971, Phil Zimbardo conducted a revolutionary experiment here in the bowels of Stanford University in the United States. It rocked the world of psychology. A group of students were divided randomly into prisoners and guards and lived in a makeshift jail. The prisoners immediately became submissive, and the guards became cruel.
Not only not getting a cigarette, but for as long as the cell is blockaded, you're...
Within a week, Phil Zimbardo's prison was inhumane, and the experiment had to be cut short.
So the amazing thing was, in 36 hours, a prisoner had an emotional breakdown. Somebody that we knew was normal and healthy 2 days earlier, because he had been he was a rebel, he rebelled, and the guards broke his spirit, humiliated him, degraded him. He became a model of how you get out. Because the only other way to get out is you would go to, as in real prison, a parole board. We had a parole board. But he became a model, again, how you get out. So each day thereafter, another prisoner had an emotional breakdown. Not pretending, a real emotional breakdown. And so in 5 days, 5 prisoners had a breakdown. And so I ended the study after 6 days, which was supposed to go for 2 weeks. So one of the guards, who was the most cruel guard, the prisoners called him John Wayne. He was an American cowboy who used to be, you know, a Wild West cowboy. And he is the ultimate dehumanization. He's remembering after the study how he felt, that he really loved being dominant and cruel. And he says, the prisoners were like my puppets, and I was a puppeteer. That's ultimate. The prisoners are college students exactly like him. In fact, he's a college freshman. He's 18 years old. He's exactly like them. But he says, you know, he used the phrase, we got off our jollies, meaning we got excited, we got pleasure from being puppeteers.
I decided that I would become the worst, most intimidating, cruel prison guard that I could possibly be.
I'll see in the future that you do work when you're told. Thanks. Say it again. Thank you, sir. Say bless you, correctional officer.
I was sort of fascinated myself that people were believing the act, and I was trying to see how far I could take it before somebody would say, okay, that's enough, stop.
We did have to do things like push-ups, we would have to sing things. At the beginning, we protested some of the actions, we did things to irritate the guards.
Okay, so here's a cartoon which sums up everything I've said up to now. These are two policemen off duty, and one is talking to the other. I'm neither a good cop nor a bad cop, Jerome. Like yourself, I'm a complex amalgam, a mix of positive and negative personality traits that emerge or not, depending on the circumstances. So this is a social, psychological, situational analysis, that we all have good and bad traits, positive and negative, but what comes out depends on the circumstance. When the circumstance is positive, then the good side of me is going to emerge. When the circumstance is negative, then the bad side of me will emerge. And so when I finished the Stanford Prison Study, I wrote a few little articles and I put it to bed. I started doing research on shyness as a self-imposed psychological prison. I started doing research on the psychology of time perspective, because in our experiment, time was distorted. Because the prisoners, the guards worked 8-hour shifts, 3 guards on each of 8-hour shifts, and of course the prisoners lived there. But each shift was like a day, from the point of view not only the prisoners, but the staff. And so time was distorted. So I began to study the psychology of time perspective. But it wasn't until 2004 when the world was horrified to see images of American soldiers sexually abusing, physically abusing prisoners who they should have been protecting in Iraq, in Abu Ghraib prison. And at that point, I began to say, I want to believe American soldiers are good apples. Somebody put them in a bad barrel. And I became an expert witness for one of those military guards. And in that position, I got to know everything about that prison, everything about him, and everything about the situation and the system. And so I decided I should write now, starting in 2004, write about the Stanford Prison Experiment, make it into a book, write about Abu Ghraib, and then all evil in Rwanda and elsewhere. And so most of the book is about evil. But really, when I think about, certainly the last chapter, chapter 16, is about the goodness in people, how to create everyday heroes. So the book is really about a celebration of the human mind's infinite capacity to make any of us be kind or cruel, make some of us very caring, some of us indifferent, make some of us creative to do the most amazingly wonderful things, and other people among us are destructive. And it makes some of us villains, some of us do horrible things, and makes other of us become heroes. So recently, this little experiment has become a Hollywood movie, an award-winning Hollywood movie. And we showed it last night at the local cinema, and hopefully we could get a copy. They actually made Polish subtitles. Hopefully we could get a copy to show here. So this is a trailer for 2 minutes. And the movie is about 90% accurate. I was a consultant. I work with them. So most of what happened in the movie is accurate. But of course, the movie is 2 hours, and they have to condense 6 days into the 2 hours. Curiously, nothing in the movie is more dramatic than in the experiment. In fact, they had to leave out much drama because they could only show one prisoner being arrested. They could only show one prisoner in parole board hearing. They could only show one visiting day. So they compressed a lot of what happened, but most of it is accurate. What's interesting for me, it's the first time in history that a movie was about an experiment. The whole movie is simply about this experiment. Now, there's a new movie about Milgram, but it's about Milgram's life. And it includes obedience to authority and about his personal relationships and so on. So this is about an experiment in psychology. And actually, it won an award at Sundance for the best science made into a film. So here's a 2-minute trailer.
Would you rather be a guard or a prisoner?
I don't think I have the qualities to be a guard.
Prisoner.
Prisoner, I guess.
Prisoner. Sounds like it would be a little less work.
Prisoner.
Why's that?
Nobody likes guards.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. This experiment will be an extension of my research into the effects prisons can have on human behavior.
You're going to be pleased to know that you all have been chosen to be the prison guards.
But under no circumstances whatsoever are you to physically assault the prisoners in any way. So remember, just as you were watching the prisoners, my graduate staff and I will be watching you.
All right, gentlemen, we're gonna have ourselves a lot of fun.
Rule number 1, prisoners must remain silent.
This is an exercise period.
Okay, is it just me, or are these guys taking this thing a bit too seriously?
Why don't you give me 20 push-ups?
Look at this guy. Thinks he's John Wayne or something.
You address me as Mr. Correctional Officer.
This might be an interesting 2 weeks after all.
Why didn't you make up your bunk, 8612?
I did, Mr. Correctional Officer.
Well, that's not what I see.
Hey, what are you doing? It's just me now!
What was that?
You just hit him. You're not supposed to hit him.
Should we step in?
No, let the guards figure it out. Let's see where it goes.
Good evening, gentlemen. How about we make this one a night to remember?
This is all real. They won't let you go. They won't let us leave.
Those are not prisoners. Those are not subjects. Those are boys, and you are harming them.
Please! Let me out of here! I want out! I want out now!
You thought you were gonna get some playtime in the yard, boy? Is that what you thought this was gonna be?
I had no idea it would turn out this way.
So the only thing that they changed in the movie, which is very upsetting to me, was the ending. The director, who's a young man, Kyle Alvarez, he's 30 years old. It's his first major movie. He also did the casting, and he also did the editing. The way some of you already know, the way the experiment really ended was on Thursday night, I invited my girlfriend, who had been a former student, and we had just decided to live together, and if it worked out, we would hopefully get married and have kids, to come down to check out what was happening. And she knew nothing about it other than it's going to be about a prison thing. And when she comes down, it's 10 o'clock at night, and at 10 o'clock, it was the last time prisoners could go to a real toilet. After that, they would have to urinate or defecate in buckets in their cell, which they hated to do because it smelled terrible. So the guards on the night shift used that opportunity as a last chance to humiliate the prisoners. And what they did was line them up, put bags over their head, chain their legs one to another, and the toilet was really around the corner, but put them in an elevator, take them upstairs, around, down in the boiler room, yelling and cursing and pushing it. And I look up, and when I see this, what is it? It's the 10 o'clock toilet run. It's my list. 8 o'clock breakfast, visiting day. It's nothing. It's at 10 o'clock. I say, hey, Chris, look at this. Look how interesting. She begins to tear. I said, what's the matter with you? She says, I can't look at this, and runs out. I run after her. I say, what's wrong with you? And she said, how could you see what I see and not be upset? These are not prisoners, they're not guards, they're boys, they're students. You are a loving, caring professor. How could you not see this? And I'm telling her, no, it's about the power of the situation. And she said, stop. You have been changed by your experiment. You have been changed by the power of the situation. And then she said, and I'm still arguing, and she said, wait a minute. If this is the real you, I thought you were someone else, I don't think I want to continue my romantic relationship with you. And that was a slap in the face. And I literally, I said, oh my God, you're right. I have to end the study. Now, the curious thing is that this happened outside of the prison. This was in the courtyard in front of the psychology department. And to this day, we both talk about, would I have done that if we had that argument in the basement in the prison, where I was still embedded in the situation? I'm not sure. But so essentially I said, we have to end the study tomorrow. It's like midnight, we're having dinner. I'm just thinking, I got to bring all the prisoners who had breakdowns back. I have to bring the guards on all the shifts back. I have to get money to pay them. We have to do all these things. And so we ended the study the next day. The director said, that's really interesting, but once I say, okay, I'll end the study, the movie's over. And it's a funny kind of letdown. So what he did was, he has us have the argument, and then she runs away, and I go down, and I turn on the television, I'm looking at what's happening, and it's the last 10 minutes of the movie is horrific. It's all the worst things that happened on several different nights, including the guards encouraging the prisoners to simulate sodomy, to simulate having sex with one another, bending over. And it builds, and the part of the movie is really intense, that you see yelling and screaming and hands and faces, and then it ends. So it's a much more, so he chose the dramatic ending, which sadly takes away the only hero in the study was this woman, Christina Maslach, my now wife, Maslach Butter Mushrooms. Again, she's from a Polish father, who's Polish American father. Okay, so why do good people do heroic deeds? The answer is we don't know. Here's some obvious answers. Two things missing from every psychology textbook is the word hero and heroism. Compassion is there, empathy is there. It's amazing. We have not studied heroism in psychology, in sociology, in anthropology, in political science. We have a whole literature on evil, on aggression, on violence, and we have not studied. Now, curious thing, we have positive psychology. Marty Seligman, as you know, started positive psychology 20 years ago. And there's a handbook of human strengths and virtues. And in that handbook, which is several hundred pages, the two words missing is hero and heroism. And I actually confronted Marty Seligman, who's a friend of mine. He said, how could that be? He said, empathy and compassion are the highest private virtues. Heroism is a civic virtue. And I said, what good is compassion if it doesn't lead to action? If I'm lying bleeding, I don't want you to come and say, I feel your suffering. I say, pick me up or get out of here, you know, get somebody who can help me. So are there circumstances that can make ordinary people do good things? So I'm going to quickly go to the positive side. So the line dividing good and evil cuts through the center of every human heart. So Alexander Solzhenitsyn, as you know, the Russian poet, who was sent to Stalin's Gulag Archipelago, the worst prison in human imagination, he says, it's not a decision that's abstract. Every one of us has to make that decision many, many, many times. So how do we know the right thing? So we have to develop a balanced time perspective. It's an optimal blend of future focus, remembering the best things from the past, and selected present hedonism. I wrote a book, The Time Paradox. And what's paradoxical is the most important decisions you have to make is really inside of you. It's your psychological sense of time perspective, how you partition the world into time zones, past, present, and future. And within those, It's you understand your weaknesses, you understand your strengths. We all have biases. We overemphasize the past. We overemphasize the future. Some of us overemphasize the present. Some of us live in a negative past. Some of us live in a positive past. And so I developed a scale, the Zimbardo Time Perspective Inventory, that measures very precisely your six time factors. And if you go online, timeparadox.org, you can take the scale, and it gives you immediate feedback, and it compares your score to what we think is the ideal, optimal one. So we now know that time perspective is really a fundamental aspect of human nature. There's a lot of research that show it predicts better than any personality measure. And people who focus on the positive things in their life, they're happy, they have high self-esteem, they're patriotic, they have a sense of gratitude, a sense of wisdom. People who are high on present hedonism, they join many groups, they have a lot of joy, they have pleasure in life, they're sensual, they're sexual, they have a lot of energy. Future-oriented people like us, we are achievement-oriented, we focus on good health, we have expectancies, we have hope. And essentially, optimal mix is you want to think about the good things in your past, because that gives you roots, that grounds you to your identity and your family. The future gives you wings to soar to new destinations, new challenges. The present gives you energy to explore people, places, self, and your own sensuality. So you need that combination. And the problem is too many of us only have one and not the other. So once you take the scale, you become aware of what the shortcomings are. And then in the book we say, how can you become more future, more past, or present? So essentially, the goal is striving to achieve a more balanced time perspective is critical. I think it's a first step toward becoming an everyday hero. So you want to think, when you think back, suppress those negative memories. Think of what are the good things in life? What are the good experiences you had? You want to be able to have better mental well-being. And every day there's issue. What are the issues you want? Focus on the good things. Develop positive relationships with other people. Have hopes and dreams. And then begin to plan. Plan ahead. What am I going to do today? What am I going to do this week? What am I going to do next week? And then live your plan out. Every day find, what can I do that is enjoyable? What can I do to make my life better? What can I do to make other people's life better? And then I'm going to expand the present rather than have it be very narrow. So the decision to act heroically is a choice that many of us will be called upon to make at some point in time. So what is a hero? When I give talks to high school students, they will say, oh, we have Superman, Batman. You know what? No. You have something that no superhero has. What is that? You have a brain. No superhero has a brain. You know why? Because they are the creation of a cartoonist. They can't do what you can create. You can make your own superhero, and you can make yourself a superhero, and we're going to teach you how. So this is what we say. This is our program. So heroes are people who act on behalf of others in need. Somebody needs you, they're hurt. Or heroes are people who defend a moral cause. The problem is it's dangerous to do it. That you could get hurt, you could die. If you're a whistleblower, which is one kind of hero, you often don't get promoted, you often lose your job. The interesting thing is heroes are almost always modest and humble. When you say, that was heroic, people say, no, I did what I had to do. No big deal. So what can you do? So what does it take to be a hero? Most people say, well, we have the whole history of hero. We have this Greek hero, Agamemnon, Achilles, these famous people. You go to every park in every city in Poland, there's a guy on a bronze horse with a spear or a gun or something. They're special people. No, those are male warrior killers. That's one category of hero. We really don't want that category anymore. So heroes are usually ordinary people. It's their actions that are extraordinary. You become an extraordinary hero by having extraordinary actions, but the people are typically ordinary. So my 10-step program for positive personal change towards civic virtue begins with this. So these are very simple things. So this is the first time I'm presenting this. So one, be self-aware combined with situational sensitivity. Be rooted in who you are. Who am I? Who are you? Maintain a vision of your ideal self. Who would I like to be ideally? Be sensitive and aware of situational power. So this is a combination of two different things. A self-recognition of what's inside and what's around you. So when you look in the mirror, you're a little cat. You want to be a lion. You don't want to be a little cat. Secondly, be modest in your self-estimates. It's better to perceive yourself as vulnerable and take necessary precautions because, again, there are influence agents all around you. My colleague Bob Cialdini, in his book that many of you know, Influence, says the world is filled with influence agents. Their job is to make you feel invulnerable when you're vulnerable, get you to buy things you don't need, get you to do things you don't want to do. And so it's better to say, I could be persuaded, I could be taken. Suppress self in service to society. By maintaining a positive self-esteem, you can more easily separate your ego from your actions. Try and laugh at yourself at least once a day so that you don't have an inflated ego. Be accountable to yourself. The big problem, as we know from Leon Fessinger's dissonance theory, you take an action and it's wrong. And then you spend a lot of time justifying it, when all you have to say is, I was wrong. I made a mistake, I'm sorry. I changed my mind, it won't happen again. That's the hardest thing to do. When you can say that, there's no dissonance. I was wrong, I made a mistake. People spend so much time justifying wrong behavior, mistakes. So instead of saying fake it, face it. Mindfulness is really important. Engage in life as fully as possible. Be mindful and aware, attuned to the moment, but prepared to disengage and think critically when necessary. So you want to be focused, like Buddhists, be in the moment, but things are happening around you. So you want to be able to do both. You want to focus on the moment, be very mindful of everything around you, but at any point step back and do a critical analysis. Number 6, question information. Separate the messenger from the message in your mind. You want to always analyze what is this person saying and who is saying it. So what is the source of the message and what is the message? And those are always separate. Number 7, intuition. Very often you're in a situation and it doesn't feel right. Somebody is saying something, somebody's doing something, and it doesn't feel right. It sounds like, did I hear right? I mean, it sounded like somebody was saying something very prejudiced. All of us have what I call discrepancy detectors. Is part of you immediately says, hey, I expected something, but it's not happening. And instead of saying, oh, it'll be okay, at that moment, you want to tune into what I call violations of expectations. Be aware that something is not right. And so be alert. It's simply like if I was lecturing and you were sitting in the back and you smell smoke. Okay, instead of saying, well, I'm imagining. It could be a sign that there's a fire, that there's only 2 exits down here, so that you pay attention. Let me notice. Let me pay attention now. Could this smoke be dangerous? Confront authority. The problem with authority is they have power. So how do you learn to confront authority when authority is doing the wrong thing? Be polite, individuate yourself. You always say, hi, I'm Philip Zimbardo, Mr. Johnson, I know you're the principal, and then describe the problem objectively, to say, it seems to me that A, B, C is happening when really the school is supposed to be promoting D, E, and F. The problem is, very often we get excited and we get angry and we get emotional. Press the pause button. Stop. Press the pause button and always say, and what do you think? Always allow the other person to express their point of view. Number 9, discriminate ideology. Ideologies are words. They're abstractions used always for political, social, economic purposes. Be always wary of following orders. People always give orders. People always have rules. And you want to know, what is my goal? And if I follow this order, what's going to happen to me? Don't follow blindly. In many situations, people say, hey, that's the rule. You say, who made the rule? What happens if I don't follow it? Typically, if you don't follow, you get punished. Well, who's going to punish me? So they are abstractions for controlling human behavior. They are ways to elicit our compliance and conformity. Who made the rule? What purpose does it serve? Who maintains? In some cases, it's an antique rule. And people keep doing it because nobody complains. You say, you know, you complain, people say, yeah, it doesn't make sense. You know, okay, we'll change the rule. And lastly, I have an exercise that I encourage you to try. Practice being a positive deviant for one day. What does that mean? It means think about something in your self-image and violate it for one day. Well, the simplest thing is I put a black dot on my forehead, actually a square, because a black dot might look like a Buddhist thing. It's this little square. And you do it with an erasable black marker. What happens? People say, what is that? It's a black dot. They say, take it off. I say, no, it's just a black dot. I'm just trying some things out. People get crazy. They get crazy, especially your mother. You know, they say, take it off, it looks stupid. It doesn't matter. And you can't see it. And so nothing has changed from your point of view. You don't look in the mirror. And the problem is you now realize that the people around you want you to be what they want you to be. And they get upset when you don't want to do the things they want you to do. And suddenly, if you can resist for one day, because the temptation is to go like this, okay? If you can resist for one day, you realize how much of who you think you are is them. The kind of music you like is the kind of music your friends like. The way you dress, for women, the way you do your hair, the kind of jewelry, whether or not you use nail polish, is really an indication of the people around you, your social influence, and especially true of young people. And again, you look at historical pictures. You know, if you look at pictures of college students 10 years ago, 20 years ago, they look totally different. Their dress is different, the kind of music they like is different, and everybody thinks it's my taste, I chose it. So if you can be a positive deviant, it makes you aware that so much of what you do, look, and your ideas are influenced by people around you. By resisting, you get a new sense of power. So now when other people are saying, no, we don't help, we don't want migrants in our country, whatever it is, you now have the power to say, I can act differently, I can act personally. So how do we spread the idea of heroism? So it's very quick, some examples of people doing it every day. In America, a few years ago, on a New York subway train comes in every 3 minutes. I lived in the subway. I used to travel 2 hours a day in the subway from one part of New York to the other. And on the subway, in this particular case, a man falls across the track. He has a seizure. He falls across the track. There's 75 people on the station, a very crowded. Everybody sees it, nobody does anything. So that's the bystander effect. What happens then is there's a black man, and he has 2 little children. He looks around, nobody helps. He says, somebody's got to help. He gives his children to strangers, says, take care of my children, jumps down on the tracks, takes the guy who's lying across the tracks, the train will cut him in half, in threes, puts him between the tracks, jumps on top of him, presses him down, and the train goes over his head. And we'll see what happens in a moment.
On the New York City subway, it's hard enough finding someone who will give up his seat to a stranger, let alone be willing to give up his life for one.
The train was coming in like that.
It happened just 50-year-old Wesley Autry, a construction worker and Navy veteran, was standing on a subway platform with his 2 little girls when right in front of them, a man started having a seizure.
He kind of stumbled and over his own feet and fall backwards. I see a train coming, but the train is so close, I'm like, what do I do?
Wesley jumped onto the tracks and thought if he could just lie on top of the man, keep him from flailing, maybe the train would roll right over both of them. The clearance was exactly 21 inches. Wesley and the man, 20 and a half.
No way the train can stop before this gentleman could get him up off the tracks. So he covered him with his body and pushed him down to a point where the train wouldn't hit his head and held him down under the tracks while the train came and rolled right over the top of him.
It gave Wesley's children the scare of their young lives.
I thought he was going to get killed.
And Wesley, the scare of his, too.
I'm like talking to him, sir, you can't move. I got 2 kids up here looking for the father to come back. I don't know you, you don't know me, but listen, don't panic. You know, I'm here to save you.
As for the guy Wesley saved, he's 20-year-old Cameron Hollipter. And other than a few scrapes and bruises, his father says he's doing fine.
Mr. Autry's instinctive and unselfish act saved our son's life.
You know, the word hero gets thrown around a lot nowadays.
What a better way to say to start off the new year than to save a life.
And again, my favorite hero obviously is Irina Sendlerova, that all of you know so well. So she was a social worker, found out about what was happening in the Warsaw Ghetto, got a nurse's certificate from a friend, went in, and first thing she had to do was what? She had to persuade Jewish parents to let her and her colleagues take the children out of the ghetto. They didn't want to do it, of course, because they couldn't imagine how terrible it could be. And so she persuaded the rabbi, the chief rabbi, to persuade all the people to give her the opportunity and her friends to take out as many children as possible. Some of you will know that what the Nazis had decided to do was have a starvation diet, 120 calories a day, a potato, a piece of bread, and some other thing. And you could not live on that. So the old people and children, the idea in a very short time would all die, and whoever survived, they would send to slave labor camps. She managed, along with 18 women and 1 man, I call it a hero squad, mostly a female hero squad, to smuggle 2,500 children out in 1 year. They found an underground sewer that they could use, but they took children out in coffins, pretending they were dead. And the interesting thing is those children now, 50 years later, have had children and children. So at least 10,000 Jewish people around the world owe their lives to Irina Sendler. So this is really what you call a powerful ripple effect. Again, very quickly, other Holocaust heroes, you know, Jan Karski, and I'm honored to be on the advisory board. Well-educated Polish Catholic who spoke many languages, had a photographic memory, which was really important. He was a courier for the Polish underground during World War II. In 1942, he infiltrated both the Warsaw Ghetto and a German concentration camp. He collected images, descriptions of the atrocities. And he went to England. He went to America to try to tell people in our government, British government, the terrible things that are happening, that they should take action. He was not able to persuade them. Imagine, put yourself in he saw these terrible things happening. They were so terrible that people could not imagine this could be, that you have death camps. And what he says is that the common humanity of people and not the power of governments is the only real protector of human rights. I learned also that people in power are more than able to disregard their individual conscience if they come to the conclusion that it stands in the way of what they see as their official duty. I just realized this is similar to what Milgram just said, that under what conditions can you behave that go against your conscience? So Milgram was talking about individuals, but I realized Karski, and I had not thought about this in a moment, is saying political leaders can disregard their conscience when somebody says, you know, you have the power to help stop what's happening in the ghetto. They could have bombed the tracks of all the train tracks going into Auschwitz, going into all of the concentration, and they never did, and they could have easily done that because it got in the way of their official duty. Pilecki, as you know, in 1940 volunteered also to go to Auschwitz to gather intelligence. He started a resistance movement, escaped, and took part in the Warsaw Uprising here. Sadly, he got executed by the Stalinist secret police for being a foreign imperialist.
You know,
I'm going to skip this now. So the Dalai Lama believes, as I said, compassion will save the world. I had a dialogue with the Dalai Lama, and I said, doesn't compassion have to be transformed into heroic action in order to make a difference? And he reluctantly said, well, maybe, because what he's selling is compassion and I'm selling heroism. Anyway, so let's work together, create a new generation of heroes in your school, business, community, all of Poland and around the world. How are we going to do it very, very quickly is heroes must act. Superman's father tells Superman, flying around all day won't cut it. Sooner or later, you're going to have to fight some evil. And the way we're going to do it is you're going to join the Heroic Imagination Project, which is a nonprofit organization I started in San Francisco 8 years ago. And we teach people how to stand up, speak out, and take action to change the world in a better place. Our approach is based on the premise that ordinary people are capable of taking extraordinary action. And now we have in Poland this organization. If you go online, hip.org.pl. I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a moment. So our program now is in many different countries, and it's most advanced, curiously, in Hungary and Poland. And what we have done is, and especially for SWAPs, is I've taken what we know in social psychology and cognitive psychology and put them each into 6 separate lessons. And in each lesson, we have like 20 or 30 pages. It's all the most important concepts, all the most important research. But I organize it around powerful videos. Kids live in a visual world. So you show a video, teacher shows a video and says, what's happening? What are people doing? What would you do? And throughout there are these very provocative videos. And teachers don't lecture. Teachers are like coaches. Students are like their team. And the idea of the coach is to bring out the best in all students. And so one lesson is the bystander effect. I'll show you an example in a moment. We know the more people present in an emergency, paradoxically, is fewer people help. Mindset. Carol Dweck at Stanford has this theory, which is proven over and over again, that all of us have a blind spot, a fixed mindset. Each of us says, you know, I'm good at crossword puzzles, but I'm not good at music. I'm good at mathematics, I'm not good at memory for history. Or we say, women are not good at technology, men are not good in conversation, you know, black people. We have a fixed mindset. And the interesting thing she says is every single skill is improvable, even perfectible, by 2 things, practice and effort. And you can transform yourself and the world by learning that. So we have a whole lesson, and we have a lesson on group pressure, lessons on discrimination. So we have these lessons, which are 18 to 20 pages, and we license them very cheaply to whole nations, and then the person in charge that I deal with puts them into different schools, high schools, colleges, and now in businesses. And then, of course, we have to do we train the teachers. I train the trainers, and the trainers train teachers. So here it is in Poland. So just very quickly, you can look through. So transforming bystander apathy into heroic action. That's the description of what we do. The other one, creating the growth mindset. Developing situational awareness of authority, power, all the things we're talking about. Making social conformity positive to the individual. Reversing prejudice and discrimination, and then coping with stereotype threat. So just take a minute if you look at the Polish description. So what I did for each of the 6 lessons, I personally paid the translator for my publisher, PWN, who's a brilliant translator, to translate all of our lessons. So all of our 6 lessons are translated into Polish. As of now, we're only doing training in the first 3, mindset, bystander, and prejudice. Of course, in every nation, we want it to be culturally relevant to use videos that are more relevant for your country, to use examples which students will understand are Polish examples rather than Hungarian examples. So for example, so in Bystander, this is at some point, students get this picture. This is in Polish or in Hungarian or in other languages, you know, and it's simply saying, the more people present, the less anybody helps. The longer nobody helps, the more confusion. The more confusion there is, the people are less likely to act. When you look around and nobody's acting, it gives a social norm of do nothing. And then it becomes a terrible cycle. However, what we show is, we have videos, soon as one person helps, in seconds, less than a minute, a second person helps. What's the message? Be the one. When you help, you change the norm, you change the situation. So don't let yourself be confined by the fact that you look around, nobody's doing anything. They're doing the wrong thing. So think of Wesley Autry. You look around, 75 people are doing nothing. That's not the right thing to do, that's the wrong thing to do. Now, what he did was foolish, okay? He was impulsive. What he could have done was grab the guy, put him next to the station, call for help. They could have picked him up, and he wouldn't have to risk his life. In fact, it happened in New York 2 weeks later that somebody did that because they saw the video of Wesley Autry, and the guy said, I didn't want to risk my life. So we're trying to promote being a wise and effective hero, not a dead hero. So our program now is, it started in Poland and Hungary, and now I'm about to go to London next week. Our program is going to be in UK to do training, in Ireland, and I just came back from Bali, which again is the most wonderful place in the universe to go, and in Geelong, Australia. So our program is spreading, although we are broke. We have no money. I have almost no staff. It's me and two other people working part-time. But it's big vision and small treasury. But I want to end with, the only place some of our program is in less than high school is in Gliwice. There's a school called Philomata, which I visited recently. And what they've taken is not the particular lessons, but the whole idea of anybody could be a hero. And what we have, if you go on our website, things you do every day. So this day, make somebody smile. This day, give a compliment. This day, volunteer for some service. So there are things you could do every day, and none of it is heroic. But what it is you are a hero in training. That is, by doing little daily deeds of goodness, of kindness, you are on the path of heroism. That means when some big issue comes up, you are psychologically ready to do what? To act. When other people are inhibited or inertia keeps them down, by being a hero in training, think of yourself, then you're going to act, you're going to take action. So the wonderful thing, I visited the school last year, and the teachers wrote a song, a hero song, in my honor, that the children performed.
Bohaterem każdy może zostać. To być może całkiem zwykła postać. Tak jak ty, tak jak ja. Razem dziś pójdziemy w świat. Uśmiech nieść będziemy. Szczyty zdobędziemy. Jak roślina dziś do słońca pniemy się.
światem jest nas bardzo wielu, codziennych bohaterów.
Zacznij razem z nami, świat z jej marzeniami, wyobraźnią bohatera. Bo ty się dziś nauczysz, ludzkie serca skruszysz, codziennym bohaterem bądź już teraz. Zacznij razem z nami, świat z jej marzeniami, wyobraźnią bohatera. Bo ty się dziś nauczysz, ludzkie serca skruszysz, codziennym bohaterem bądź już
I don't think we have time for questions, but that's the end of our presentation. So Super Z thanks you for caring and your attention. Thanks so much.